We'll start off by looking at this Instagram reel and then we'll get into it.
And family about systems collapse, the more I am witnessing real time the level of their disillusionment. Their disillusionment that any shred of the system is going to hold them because they're still so committed to this idea of comfort embedded in the status quo. And I understand where it comes from. I understand why it feels so easy and why it's kind of like an automatic response when you are from the Western world and you literally sit at the heart of the imperialist core, how easy it is to forget that any shred of comfort that you have from that position comes at a cost to the liberation and freedom of the rest of the world. You're living in Project America, not a country, a business venture. And within that reality is the fact that so many of us are still so comfortable walking around more as automaton employees than actual human beings that understand that your government is using you. And that any shred of a life that you have that is built from the foundation of Western imperialism will inevitably collapse around you, whether you sacrifice your comfort willingly or whether it is ripped from you.
Okay, first point off the rip. Yeah, people are walking around acting as if normal is just gonna continue. Like, normal is over. All right, if you're clinging to normal and thinking, oh, things just have to go back to normal, that's not gonna happen. We are living through collapse. And so continuing to invest yourself in, oh, well, when things get back to normal, I'll do this, I'll do that. Like, no, move accordingly, right? The other thing is, yeah, people are very much wrapped up in their comfort. And that is one of the main gripes that I have, I think, with how we have been engaging with this moment, which I'll get to in a second. The third point I wanted to make was, yeah, what she's saying here. You can either have that comfort ripped from you or you could give it up willingly. There's this point that is made in degrowth circles that I believe I've also mentioned. You know, it's this notion that either we have degrowth by choice, we have degrowth by force. Degrowth by choice means that we control our descent, that we try our best to land gracefully, to land these systems gracefully, to gently though radically transition away from these destructive growth-oriented systems that are destined to ruin, right? That are not sustainable because endless growth is not sustainable and is never sustainable. That we make that transition intentionally and gracefully, right? That is degrowth by choice. Then you have degrowth by force, which is that the system collapses because the growth could not be maintained. Remember, it cannot be maintained either way. The system collapses and that's it, right? We are forced to contend with the reality and then the consequences of these 200 years of industrial extraction, of these 500 years of colonial extraction. That, yeah, we had the opportunities. We've had several opportunities to transition away. We've had all of these years, all these decades to transition away to intentionally degrow, but we gave it up for just like one more hit of this deeply unsustainable, it's an aberration, this lifestyle of next day delivery, this lifestyle of instantaneous travel and communication, all these different things. Like, there may be ways that we can keep some of the perks of an international economy, maybe, perhaps, potentially, is something that we can explore, but this particular permutation of it, it's not gonna last. It's not going to last. And we can choose to accept that and to approach our social change accordingly, or we can pretend that, yeah, things are just going to go back to normal. No.
Understand that that day is coming. The writing is on the wall, yet not a lot of people seem worried enough about that. And like, not worried in the sense that you panic, but like worry in the sense that you start to organize yourself.
Oh yeah, this point the comment is making, it's not even comfortable, it's an illusion of comfort. That's the thing, people are clinging to this comfort, quote unquote, of a society that is not actually meeting their needs. And getting upset with you because you're like, hey, this society not only is not meeting your needs, but it's also like gonna fail. The writing is on the wall, it's gonna fail. And they're like, no, things will go back to normal. No, we just have to reform this, that, or the other, and things go back to normal. No.
Comfort that you find in just focusing on what you can control needs to shift and expand its capacity, not just to coping and looking on the bright side of things, but to like community sovereignty that runs so deep that it outlasts the collapse of these systems. I recently had a conversation with someone that was interesting, and they kind of mentioned the fact that I have this tendency to talk about American systems whilst I have removed myself from them. I say removed myself with air quotes because once again, like, The whole world is built on Western imperialism. Can you ever remove yourself from that? I think a lot of people see me living outside of the US and like making a conscious decision to do that and wondering like, okay, well, like what are you doing to organize yourself? And I think this is a really good question, and I don't see it as attacking whatsoever. I see it as very like formative of like, what can we do when we feel powerless? And for me, that's looked like giving myself the education, the kinds of skills that I believe are going to outlast capitalism, like a knowledge of holistic health and plant medicine and how to heal people, body, mind, and spirit. Looking into how to grow my own food to create food sovereignty for myself and others through permaculture. And after that, I hope to take a carpentry course. I hope to reunite myself with these skills that our ancestors had that have been strategically lost in the last hundreds of years since the Industrial Revolution. And community building is definitely on my list as I achieve all of these things and hope to find people that feel aligned with the path and the process that I'm on. On the way to finding your ideal village, you have to actively be becoming your ideal villager.
100% agree there. Don't know that creator, but shout out to them. You know, that's a solid point they made there. And it kind of connects what we were talking about in the last kind of segment about what Frag Herbert was saying, that we need to shift away from this reliance on the centralized apparatus, from these government systems as our saviors, as the guardians of normal, and to recognize normal is messed up. It should not be maintained. It cannot be maintained. I don't think people think about or really understand what is necessary to maintain normal. Okay, there's a kind of an intentional ignorance, right? An enforced ignorance about what normal entails. So I want to show you all exactly what is the process that is sustaining normal, right? I will use the example of this website. I've actually referenced this before. Okay, so this is anatomy of an AI system. I've shown it briefly in one or two of my videos, and it will be making appearances in future videos. But I think it's a very useful resource for thinking about how not just AI systems, but a lot of the technologies that we enjoy and don't think about are actually being produced, right? So the chart is very large and it could take a lot of time to look through it. But you have over here income distribution, the CEOs and stuff on the top of the income distribution ladder, and at the very bottom you have the e-waste and landfill workers, the repair services, the underground miners, and so on. All along this chain you see the levels of income and how it's distributed. Right here you look at the geological processes of deep time that have produced the elements on the periodic table, and when you look at the exploitation of those elements over time from 1950 onward, you see this dramatic rise proportionally with, you know, China coming out on top here, but China of course feeding the rest of the Earth's demand. And so you start with any one of these elements, right? Call it element X, and you go forward. You have the mines, which require certain resources, which require certain labor, which produce certain waste. And you see that the profit from the system is being fed further up the chain. The mines, the issues with mines, with getting these rare earth minerals include hard labor, forced labor, child labor, low paid labor, conflict minerals, and environmental and working hazards. Hazards related to the environment include erosion, formation of sinkholes, loss of biodiversity, etc., etc., etc. Working risks include accidents and health risks, cave-ins, floods, dust, fumes, etc., heavy loads. Then you move up to refine it. And you notice on each step of the process you have transportation. Transportation which relies on oil, of course, and gas. So we have transportation to the next stage in the process, because this is a global process. It's not all taking place in one part of the world. And so you have the smelters and the refiners, which are dealing with a lot of waste, which are dealing with a lot of working hazards, radiation, dangerous gases, corrosive chemicals, etc. And once again, the profits are extracted from the labor combined with the material producing waste. The profit is going towards the owner in that system. Transporting, again, we get to component manufacturers, and with that comes the issues of toxic waste and health hazards, the use of toxic materials, the irradiation of skin, miscarriages, birth defects, neurotoxins, air pollution, toxic waste, groundwater pollution. All this goes into the components that all of our technologies rely on. Then you have transportation. You move on to transportation. You have the assemblers, the next step in the process. Low paid labor, illegal working hours, unfair compensation for unscheduled overtime, health and safety issues, etc., etc. Where the profits go in. Again, owning classes. You move on to distributors. The distributors take those products, the profit from those products again go to the owning classes. And the transportation takes us to these different aspects of domestic infrastructure. The Amazon Echo Dot, the home Wi-Fi routers, cables, repeaters, servers, energy consumption, water consumption, voice services. And when you look at the voice services, you see the kind of AI training as well. You see the kind of black box aspect of it, where we don't even know the extent to which these systems work, how they operate, who is being exploited, or what level of information is being extracted. You see the extraction of data as well, and how data is processed, the violations of privacy. So I encourage you to like really take your time and look through this chart. I'm not going to cover everything, of course. You see how human labor is being used to feed into this AI process, right? The immaterial labor, mostly, the knowledge and experience being fed into these systems and being profited from by the people who run these systems. Right, data preparation and labeling. You look at this chart, you have the quantification of human-made products and the quantification of human body actions and behaviors. Whoever made this chart, I think they did a really fantastic job. If you're curious, it is anatomyof.ai. You can go to that website and find this whole thing. Then you see the end of the process, the end of the life cycle, the waste that comes from households and companies and public bodies. And that waste filters and is collected by the informal sector and the formal sector. It is shipped in some cases overseas. It is recovered in some cases, leading to various working hazards and environmental hazards. It is disposed of in ways that feed into, once again, the geological process, but disrupts that geological process because of the often long life of these products and the concentration of these products in areas that were not designed to effectively absorb all of these waste material. And so when you look at this and you study this chart and you look at this whole process and this whole framework of exploitation that goes into something like a phone, a smartphone, it goes into a AI system, I think it's very difficult to come away with that with the sense that, oh yeah, we just need to like make a few reforms here and there. Or, oh yeah, we just need to, put it in workers' control. On a systemic level, this needs to change. Part of that transition, I think, needs to be developing a sufficiency that does not rely on these electronic systems. Again, I actually use technology. I'm not opposed to technology on its face. I'm just critical of technology, of where it's coming from, of how it's being produced, of how sustainable these technologies are, especially when you factor in things like planned obsolescence, you factor in the lack of repairability of a lot of these technologies. We're producing all these things and it's like designed to go into the landfill in many cases. It's designed just to profit. And unfortunately, I feel like so alone sometimes in thinking about these processes and thinking about like, yeah, these technologies are useful, they're helpful, they allow us to connect with each other, they allow us to do all these different things, but then also they save lives as well. Let's not ignore that. They save lives. And yet, for all these lives that they save, they also take lives, and on the consumer end of things, we need to think about that. We need to interrogate the latent treatler particles that we may be inhaling through propaganda and through the incentive structures of the system. By treatler, by the way, I'm just referring to the idea that you as a consumer rely upon these consumer services, rely upon these exploitative systems and refuse to consider them, to care about them, to think about the impact on labor and think about the impact on the environment. Now, I know treatler can be used in other ways, can be weaponized in sometimes very harmful ways, but the idea of the treatler is in some ways, I think, valuable. Right? To think about, oh, how am I being a treatler right now? How am I engaging with the things that I consume in ways that do not account for the impact of that consumption? Or how am I consuming in ways that just care less, that just shrug these things off? It's like, oh, well, as long as I get my phone, as long as I get my computer, I don't care. I don't have the solution, right? I don't know what the transition is fully going to take. I know the things that I believe we need to be pushing towards and working towards, but I don't have like some blueprint, right? I don't think a blueprint bacon is even possible or useful, right? Because what the system that emerges to replace, or the systems that emerge to replace the fall of this one, I don't think can be fully predicted and are not going to be determined by singular actors like myself. I can advocate for certain things, but I can't decide the future. And so anyway, when looking at this, I'm thinking about this. I'm also looking at the impact of the war on Iran that is being waged by the US and Israel. And this war is also being waged on the rest of the world because in response to the war, Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz, which has basically led to an impending collapse of the global supply chain. And so the anti-anarchist crowd and contingent can laugh and caricaturize us as anti-global trade or some kind of parochial peasant-brained political movement. I am firmly of the belief in internationalism and in international solidarity and stuff, and even in some cases in international trade and the benefits that can be gleaned, both the trade of goods and services and information, but also of the exchange between peoples. I don't want us to be stuck on our little bubbles and our little islands. I do want us to be able to move across this planet, particularly without the limits of borders. I want these things. When I think about what it takes to get these things, when I think about what it takes to get this constant exchange of planes around the world, the amount of fuel that consumes, when I think about the fact that this whole system is being disrupted now by this war because the system is so fragile, I'm just like, y'all could laugh, but I mean, this is why we need to be thinking local. This is why we need to be building local resilience. And the oil prices, the rise in oil prices, that's part of it, right? We should have moved off from oil so long ago. Of course, the things that we move from oil to, whether it be solar or wind or hydro or nuclear, they also in part rely on these extractive and exploitative processes. But maybe we could have made balanced trade-offs. Maybe, right? I question that because the way that those resources are even extracted requires a level of coercion, a level of unwillingness that has to be overcome. Because I don't think anybody willingly signs. I was like, yeah, I want to go breathe in toxic fumes and stuff. I want to go and risk being buried in some mine. But let's say theoretically it was possible and there was a way to kind of have a trade-off of, okay, we do some environmental impact for these benefits and we try to counteract the impact in other ways and to give back to the environment in other ways. Still, it's like, we didn't do that, and I don't know if we ever will or if we can. And if we can, I don't know exactly how it'll be possible. It's something I'm still thinking about and trying to work through. But yeah, it's not just about oil prices, where this war is concerned, the impact this war is concerned. It's also about the impact of sulfur, the sulfur that passes, that is the byproduct of the refining process, and the sulfuric acid that comes from that, the sulfuric acid that is used to extract essential minerals the rest of our technologies rely upon. And then also looking at the amount of nitrogen that passes through the Strait of Hormuz that no longer is passing through there. And nitrogen, of course, is very necessary for nitrogen fertilizer, which is necessary for much of our global monoculture approach to industrial approach to agriculture. And so brace for impact, continue to build local resilience, plant as much food as you can, and I wish you all the best.